Thanks, Patrick, for the intro, and thanks, Wade, for your intro previous to that. My last piece of housekeeping is I'd like to thank Tim from Yell IT for taking one decision away from me this morning, which was which shirt was I going to wear. So thanks, Tim, if you're out there somewhere. So welcome to my talk. It's called Penetrating the Executive Mind. Sorry, Patrick, there's nothing dirty about it.
I'm relieved, man.
Yeah. And what I want to talk about, it's really just a short guide of when we get a penetration testing report, what do we need to do with it? So first things first. Is it that one? Hey. Oh, look at that. The disclaimer. So the views I'm going to express today don't represent the BEQ group in any way, but just my personal views. Okay, so I'm going to, yeah. So this is the agenda for what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm just going to give you one or two slides on where I've been and how I got here. I'm going to insult everybody's intelligence and just do a slide on basic risk management, because that's a key element of the pen testing report. And then I'll go on to talk about the translation challenge, who the stakeholders are, our testing program, and then I'll go into a bit more detail about what I like to see in the report, the exec summary, the detailed results, and then I'll just wrap up at the end, and there should be some time for some questions. Next one. Yep. So when I was thinking about who I am and where I've been, I just put together a whole lot of pictures of things that I've worked on over the time I've been in the industry. So I started my life in IT fixing Commodore 64s. So the first testing tool I ever worked with was Boulder Dash, for those old enough to remember Boulder Dash. And for those of you in the audience who think GTA is something new and funky, it's not really. It's been around for a very, very long time. And then I sort of worked through working on Novell, did a lot of work with Novell, and was told that if I got a CNE that I'd make a fortune. I got one in 1993, still waiting for my fortune. And then moved on through the Windows world and then on to information security. Next one. So here's the more serious list. So I've worked in IT since 1987, which, looking around the crowd, there's probably some other people who've been around that long as well, but a lot who haven't. My early career was in infrastructure, local area networks. I touched on the Novell piece before doing service delivery, IT management across a variety of industries, from healthcare to logistics, waste disposal and so on. I took a mid-career break in 2002. My children and my wife think it was a midlife crisis. And I did grow my hair long, and I tried to dye it blonde and it went orange. And after about 12 months, the wife sort of said, I think you actually need to go and do something with your life. So I sort of thought, well, information security would be cool. And that's what I've done ever since. And as Pat said, a stint at IBM Managed Security Services, which shouldn't be held against me. It was a great learning experience. Worked on a lot of large-scale projects, and then joined the bank sorry, in 2012, and where I took over as a team of one from Mike at Aussert. Was the incumbent when I took over. A little bit higher. Sorry. Is that better?
That's better, right.
Okay. All right. And since joining the bank, we've grown the security capability from that team of one to a team of five. So it's been a fun journey. Anyway, let's get on with the content. So I'm going to talk about risk management. So when I talk about risk management, I talk about two two types of risks. So there's your inherent risk, which is really what, when we hire a pen tester, we whitelist them through the firewall, the IPS, the SIEM, and whatever other controls we have, so they can test the inherent risk of a particular application. So by definition, the inherent risk is the risk an activity would pose if there were no controls in place. So the table down the bottom sort of talks about, so if you discover a remote command execution vulnerability that doesn't require authentication, that would have a critical inherent risk. Next one. Thanks. So when you apply controls to that inherent risk, you end up with residual risk. So an example, just an example of inherent versus residual risk. If I drive my car home, I park it outside my house, leave the keys in it, leave it unlocked, there's an inherent risk of something bad happening, right? So there's things I can do to reduce that risk. So I can maybe take my keys inside with me. I can lock my car, could put it in the garage like the red one there. And so the residual risk of it being stolen is now much less. And it really is as simple as that. Yep. So let's talk about when we receive a penetration testing report, this is the kind of thing that happens. I'll give you a moment to digest. Cool. So we all understand that a lot of work goes into producing the report, but ultimately my boss and my boss's boss want this much information out of it. So it's kind of my job to extract that information out of the report. So who are the people that are, I'm going to talk about the people that are going to be interested in the output of the report, and I'm going to start at the top and work down. So ultimately, the company directors at board level want to know what residual risks have been revealed by the testing report. So who are the company directors? They're an independently appointed group that are responsible for determining and implementing policy. In Australia, company directors are legally obliged to do the following things, and the ones in red are the ones that really apply to the penetration testing piece. So they're required to act honestly, know what the company's doing, take due financial care, make sure the company can pay its debts, ensure appropriate records are kept. Is that cool? Yep. Oh, back one. Yep. And act in the best interest of the company. Now, if they fail to do these things, they go to jail. So I, for one, don't really want to be responsible for them not being able to carry out those activities because, you know, if my board member goes to jail, I'm probably looking for another job. So what all this means to me from the penetration testing report perspective is that company directors need to be made aware of the residual risks that impact on their ability to meet those obligations. So if we have a bunch of security risks out there, it fits under that knowing what the company's doing. Okay, next. So the next group of people are the company executives. Now, the executives are all people who are employed by the company. So it's a bit harder for them to go to jail, but they have a similar exposure to the board as the rest of us if a board member goes to jail. So the company executives are responsible for setting strategy, the day-to-day running of the company, ensuring risks are understood and managed, and reporting exposures to the company directors. So again, what this means to me is that any of those high residual risk findings need to be remediated or they need to be escalated through that governance structure. And then the other stakeholders are, of course, the operational teams that actually do the work around the remediation piece particularly. So security team, in our case at Bank of Queensland, we're highly outsourced. So we get the report, we validate the risk ratings, we talk to the system owner and educate them about the risk and hopefully get them to get on board with some remediation. We coordinate the remediation activities, so for us that's coordinating a lot of our third parties. And if there are any things that can't be resolved, we need to escalate those risks through the appropriate risk forums so they bubble up through the governance structure. Our service providers, they need to perform the remediation activities. But if there's a circumstance where they can't, or it's uneconomical to do so, they need to escalate that risk back to us so we can escalate that risk accordingly. And in those cases, they should be coming back to us and recommending compensating controls. And system owners, which I spoke about a little bit before, they need to understand the risk to their business. And they either need to support the remediation or escalate the risks through their appropriate risk forums. So, the testing program at BOQ. So, being a bank, we're highly regulated. So I've listed a few of the regulators that have an interest in what we do up there. So the card schemes from a PCI perspective, APCA, who oversee all the FPOS and ATM networks. And the big one for us is APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. So they determine that they require that we understand our risks and can display that we're managing them. So they don't have a prescriptive set of requirements of what we have to do. So the penetration testing piece is a big part of that, being able to understand your risks. And why we think APRA is so important? Because they issue our banking licence. So if we don't satisfy them that we're managing our risks, they can take our banking licence off us. And I've talked about the other stakeholders in the report, the directors, the executives and the operational teams. So our testing program, we test all our web-facing applications and a selection of our internal applications. Why don't we do all our internal applications? There's a couple of reasons. One is because there's so many of them. And two is there's a lot of legacy applications out there, and if we ended up testing the 160 applications, we probably wouldn't finish our testing program before it was time to start again. So we do a selection based on sensitivity and criticality. We black box test everything, and then again we do a selection of the higher risk stuff to do authenticated testing against. With project work, anything with new or changed web-facing components gets a black box and authenticated test performed on it. Yep. So the report. So I found another Dilbert cartoon to typify reports. And I think the point I was just trying to make here was I understand a lot of work goes into the report, and hopefully you can all find your ink and monkey god to help you write them. Next. So for me, the key components of the report are a table of contents, so you can find the bits you need to find, an executive summary, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute. Some sort of finding summary table that makes it easy to look at and get a snapshot of what's going on. Then the detailed findings. And when I got the boss to give me feedback on the slides, she said, you need to have a risk map in there somewhere too. So, and what we mean by a risk map is an overall risk position that you can look at and you can compare year on year to see if you've improved. Okay, so I picked out a table of contents from one of our recent reports and put some ticks and crosses next to the things I liked and crosses against the things I didn't like. So exec summary, that's fine. Having a section on the pen testing approach in a pen testing report, I don't think is necessary because I've already signed off on the approach when I've signed the statement of work. Summary findings is fine. Having next steps, so from a penetration tester's point of view, his view of what the next steps are and my view of what the next steps are two entirely different things. I don't think it's necessary from a pen testing organisation to put next steps in the report. The detailed findings is fine, and an appendix with the details of the scope is fine. I put a question mark next to the risk rating matrix piece. And the reason I did that was because what I found when you use different pen testers is some of them want to use their own risk rating matrix and some of them want to use ours. And the key thing to remember with that is if you want to use our risk rating matrix, you need to make sure that you understand particularly what changes the likelihood. And I don't mind whether you want to use your own or whether you use mine, but just if you are using mine, make sure you understand it. Thanks. So let's talk about the executive summary. So again, I have a definition of what an executive summary is. So for those of you that can't read, it's a section of a document that summarises a longer report in such a way that readers can become acquainted with the content. So what I think should be in an executive summary is a brief description of the scope, 1 or 2 sentences, an overall statement about the security health of the environment, a table with the numbers of findings, some high-level observations relating to the high and medium findings, and that's really a general statement. And then some sort of closing positioning statement, which could be something like, yeah, we tested this last year and you've done a whole lot of work and you've really lifted your game. Hopefully that's what you'd say. Okay. So again, I pulled out, I had a look at some of my previous executive summaries from various pen testing houses and put some ticks and crosses against the things I thought were good and things I didn't think were good. So the one I looked at started off with this couple of paragraphs on the evolving nature of the threat landscape. From a testing report, not really necessary. I think we all know about the evolving nature of the threat landscape. They then spent another couple of paragraphs talking about how they used contemporary tools and techniques. Again, if you're not, I don't know why I'm paying you all that money. And then they went into overall health of the environment, did some observations around the high-risk findings. They could have also done something around the medium findings. I don't mind either way. And then the table with the raw number of findings, which is fine. Then they went and repeated themselves around the security health of the environment, so only need to have that in there once. And they had a statement about the low severity findings and said, yeah, we found a bunch of things that were low severity, but they'd be really hard to exploit. So I didn't think that it added any value. And then, of course, and then they had some recommendations about next steps, which I've already covered. So from that, what I think doesn't need to go in an executive summary is background on the company. We've already chosen you, so we should know that. A description of the testing approach isn't required. I don't really need to know what skills the testing team have at that point because I've already agreed to pay you, so I think that you should have the right skills. No need for generalisations about the threat landscape. And please don't cut and paste from last year's report because I do hold the two side by side and I can tell. Yes, indeed. But I'm paying lots of money. Not paying lots of money for cut and paste. So when I talked about the summary of findings piece, this was sort of what I was talking about, was something where I can have a quick look and I can see that, there's X number of, oh look, there were no extreme ones, that's good. X number of high findings in certain vulnerability categories against particular websites. It's just an easy way of visualising the test result. So when we get to detailed findings, the things I want to see in the detailed findings are obviously the target that was tested, the vulnerability details that was discovered, the risk assessment, the evidence. And one thing I don't see in many test results is a suggested remediation. And I know that the response is usually, well, you're a smart fellow, you should know what the remediation is. But it makes it easier for us when we carve it all up and give out to our third parties, if that's already in the report for us. So this was a finding from a couple of years ago, and the testing organisation gave us all the things at the top until we get to the suggested remediation. So this was just, they found a server with 3389 open and the ability to screen copy the desktop, which had users' names listed. So it's a pretty nasty one. And obviously the suggested remediation is, need to whitelist access to 3389 or VPN it, put it through a VPN, and you want to disable that screen capture functionality. So all I'm trying to point out here is that suggested remediation is really helpful. Thanks. Here's just another one for the hell of it. This was a third-party site that uses our domain. So found a reflected cross-site scripting, and you can see that the tester went through, was able to exploit. Again, suggested remediation was around validating the user input. So pretty simple stuff, but very helpful to us. So getting back to the main points of what I'd like everyone to take away with them is that when you're pen testing, you're testing inherent risk. So while something can look really serious, when you ring me up and say this is really bad, and I say, oh yeah, that's okay. I've got all these other controls. So don't be insulted because I didn't jump up and down and run around in circles with you. Always remember that what you write in the report is going to be distributed to multiple stakeholders. So it's not a document just for technical people to read. The executive summary, talked it to death a bit, just needs to be concise and factual. So sort of the less is more type message. Decide on a risk rating methodology or risk management methodology and stick with it. Don't mind if it's yours, don't mind if it's mine. And the last point was the detailed findings should define a problem and solution or a possible solution. And that is pretty much it. So if anybody's got any questions,